Dylan, Dylan is the national focus point on Ramsar and also a assistant director in the Australian Environment Department.
Yeah, DQ.
DQ, is that's how we're saying it?
Yeah,
good, excellent. Welcome, Dylan. We'll hear from you about Ramsar.
Sounds good.
I'll just put you to talk up.
Hi everyone. I feel like my description in this thing is very long. Most of it is just the department name and where I work, so please ignore that. Yeah, but thanks, Max. Actually, while I've got a little bit of time, I'm going to correct Max, because while duck hunters were very much involved in setting this up, and that was probably the impetus for all these kind of European elites to actually care about it, because a lot of them did duck hunting. A couple of other figures involved in that were Sir Peter Scott, who some of you may remember was a television presenter, son of Scott of the Antarctic, an Olympic sailor, I believe. But he devoted his later life to conservation. He was also a journalist at times. He got together with a guy, Luke Hoffman, who was the son of a Swiss, now billionaire. And they set up WWF, they set up Slimbridge, the Wildfowl and Wetland Trust in the UK, and I guess got together a lot of people and provided some financial backing to get the Ramsar Convention up. And I guess the other piece there is that this was in the Cold War, but wetlands were something that it seemed that the Soviets and the US could actually talk about because it wasn't political. So it kind of got together in the environment of the Cold War and was one of the few really good examples of everyone working together. So yeah, just a few other things. Like the duck hunting thing is definitely a key part of it, but there was this strong conservation thing that came through, but kind of through these European elites. It's kind of a murky world. The convention's still hosted in the same place WWF and the IUCN are hosted, in Glonn in Switzerland. Anyway, hi, I'm Dylan. I have replaced Catherine Isles as the focal point for Ramsar, if any of you have met her, working at the Commonwealth now in what used to be the CHUO, the Commonwealth Environmental Water Office. We've got a few other functions now, so it's grown a bit. And I'll talk to you about the Ramsar Convention globally and in Australia. So, but first I would like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of this land, as well as all the other lands on which we work and come from, and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. And I always like to acknowledge the fact that while we've got scientists working on these systems in Australia, the knowledge that had been accumulated before kind of knew a lot of these things already, and we seem to be kind of rediscovering it, and that there's probably been a process of, I guess, finding out that some of the stories that the Indigenous people were telling actually encoded a lot of ecological information, and there's some projects around Australia where we're starting to kind of pull that together and make sense of it. So I think it's good that that's happening. So an overview of the Ramsar Convention. So, as mentioned, the convention was signed in Ramsar, Iran in 1971 under a progressive government then. And it was the first environmental treaty that was fully multilateral with membership across the world. There was a lot of advocacy by scientists and NGOs, mainly around waterbird populations. This was key, and these ecosystems were supporting them. As Max said, 172 contracting parties. There's 9 Oceania parties, so Samoa, Fiji, Kiribati, New Zealand, a few others are members, although a lot of those countries don't have the resources to do a lot in this space. What else? There's a number of international organisation partners, so there's the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust, Wetlands International, the IUCN. There's also BirdLife, the International Water Management Institute, which don't exist here. So they kind of, at times, help the convention function. It kind of goes ebbs and flows. The Secretariat and Secretary General sometimes work a lot more with countries, other times a lot more with NGOs. We're shifting back to incorporating those NGOs. The new Secretary General is an African woman who worked at WWF and the UN for a number of years, and she's got a more progressive approach. So there might be some changes there. So, kind of following on from Max's other point, there are three pillars to Ramsar. So the wise use is the first pillar, and this is the wise use of all wetlands, and countries that sign up are supposed to integrate these into their national policies and legislation. And so the key thing for wise use is the maintenance of ecological character. So as Max described, ecological character includes the ecosystem functions, the ecosystem services, as well as the populations of species that live there. It's kind of a wide-ranging and pretty progressive concept, which encompasses a lot. And the wise use concept became sustainable development. So if you've heard about sustainable development, it's kind of I wouldn't say quite a refinement, but it's an evolution of that term into something that fits with our economic system, I guess. The second thing is the designation of sites on the list, and I'll talk more about that. And then the third is international cooperation. Obviously, Australia doesn't have any land borders. A lot of countries have rivers that flow into other countries or from other countries, and so there's a big focus there. We are on a migratory bird flyway. So, there's the East Asian Australasian Flyway, and there is a partnership under the Ramsar Convention that manages that, and we're involved in that, and I'm sure a lot of you are aware of sites near you where birds will migrate up to Siberia, going through China and Korea and bits of Southeast Asia. That's a really positive and important partnership, and I will just note that while Australia was having difficulties with China, the partnership was still functioning quite well. And so this is one of these things, it's hosted in Korea, where despite political differences, people are working together on these shorebirds, and you have researchers, government people, NGO people from all those different countries and working together. It's not a huge organisation, and a lot of it is volunteer labour, but it's a very positive initiative which does see results. And there is a East Asian initiative now to protect a number of the flyway sites, which has hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars pouring in. So that should be implemented over the next little while. So there's a lot happening in that international cooperation space. The other thing I'll note here is that, I guess as Max said, there's been a sense of the convention tightening just to the international listing. One of the senior advisors at the convention was telling me he feels like instead of being like a strategic conservationist, identifying the issues and working out solutions, some of the countries expect him to be a permit guy who basically they apply for their international listing and they assess it and then sign off on it. And it's not how the convention is supposed to function. It's supposed to have this more broad set of criteria, broad set of different things that it focuses on, but it's a little bit easier just to have the list. The list is something really solid and easy to understand, so potentially there's a need to kind of broaden the work under the convention out a little bit. And these are conversations people are having a bit globally, mainly in the NGO world, but some people from the international world as well. So this is all of the Ramsar sites as of yesterday, or 2 days ago. They don't get updated too often, so as you can see, they're everywhere. Obviously, there's not too many in desert regions, but you can see there are a number of oases that have been listed. I've got some stats here. So the largest site is the Rio Negro in Brazil, which is 120,000 square kilometres. The highest site is Ter Moiri Lake, which is in Jordan, and it's about 4,522 metres up. Sorry, and then the lowest site is the FIFA Nature Reserve in Jordan, which is 420 metres below sea level. Well, I'm not sure what just happened there. I'll just point out a couple of other things. So in Ukraine, you may have heard about that dam disaster. So the estuary of that river is a Ramsar site. There's work being done in the convention now with UN agencies kind of doing a remote sensing approach to look at the impacts of the war on those wetlands, and it got pretty political because Russia obviously didn't want this to happen, but there is now a program of work under the convention looking at the impacts of war on the various Ramsar sites there. there's also a few other things that I find interesting. In the west of the Sahara Desert, there's contested territory where multiple countries and different war bands are all fighting over bits of that, post-colonial state. There's a number of wetlands listed in there, and countries have tried to set up conservation initiatives there to kind of expand their claim over those territories. And then the other thing worth noting is that India, as part of its 75th anniversary of being India, got a whole heap of scientists across the country and identified a whole bunch of Ramsar sites, this is last year, and got their listing up to 75. So it's kind of an interesting recent event. Just trying to add value here. The other thing that's worth, I'm sure everyone's seen this, but every year they hold World Wetlands Day. This year's the second year that it's been an official UN day. And talking to some of the people, the number of Twitter hits they got and news articles they got has tripled or something since becoming an official UN day. So it's becoming quite successful. Here you can see all the different official World Wetland Day events. One thing you may notice is that there's not too many of them in Australia. France had a lot more than us. So I think it'd be good if next year coming into World Wetlands Day that various people here, you could do a walk around a wetland, you could do a talk, you could do something like that and just support it. It's really easy to do. If you've got an event like this or even just a seminar, you can just fill out the form and put it up there and get a bit of publicity. They put a lot of effort and create all these beautiful materials. This year's theme was It's Time for Wetland Restoration. There's this UN decade of ecosystem restoration and they're trying to line up with that because the Secretary General used to be one of the key people working on that decade. So yeah, so it's a fun day that happens every year. I'd kind of encourage everyone to look at the site in January next year. So the convention in Australia, as mentioned, we've been a contracting party since '74 and we set up the first Ramsar site, which is the Coburg Peninsula. So we had a COP in Brisbane in '96, which also was the 25th anniversary of the convention. Convention had its 50th birthday a couple of years back. And yeah, we've had Australians as Secretary General and Deputy Secretary General. The past Secretary General is still around talking about Ramsar and has some well-developed ideas about where the convention should go. The most recent legal advisor for the convention, Emma Carmody, also worked with EDO and now has a restoration company that she's set up. Emma's lovely, if difficult to be on the other side of things against. And just currently, Australia is in the standing committee for the convention, which is like the management committee, and on a number of the working groups on finance and youth engagement. We have 67 Ramsar sites, it's about 8.5 million hectares. So there's a whole range of different wetland sites. We've got artesian strings, we've got swamps, we've got peat, we've got a whole range of estuary, seagrass, coral reef systems. Kakadu is the largest site. There's a small spring on Christmas Island, which is a hectare, which is the smallest site. Not much more to say there, except that it's worth visiting these sites if you can get to them. Many of them are really gorgeous and have a lot of bird life. I'm sure you know that. So roles and responsibilities are kind of interesting here. So we have guidelines, which I'll go into later, for management of sites, and we expect landholders to kind of manage the site in a way that improves the ecological character or looks after it. There are some issues in that there's private land which has some sites on it, which has passed to new owners over the years, and still figuring out how best to deal with those kinds of issues, potentially taking compliance action against people who do things that aren't going to be great for the health of the wetland. Probably better to get covenants and set up systems so that people are more motivated to manage it well. But this is kind of an issue for us. As I'm sure you know, environmental matters and water, natural resource matters are generally with the states under the Constitution. So Andrea and her team have to take responsibility for a lot of the kind of actual management of the sites and looking after them. Victoria's particularly good in that they have money to do a lot of work on ground, and that helps them get things done. The funding it can be variable from state to state, but states are responsible. The Australian government, we're the authority. We have the overarching legislation. It also underpins the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, which we're responsible for implementing with the states and the ACT. And yeah, we own a number of the sites which are national parks. So, listing of sites. I won't go into too much detail here, but so sites need to meet at least one of the criteria, and I'll look at them in a moment. But the basic steps are that you need to talk to the state or territory government, and with them prepare a Ramsar information sheet. Along with that should be a Ramsar management plan. We used to do things called ecological character descriptions. We're potentially phasing those out. The Ramsar information sheet requires certain information in certain formats, and that's set by the convention. A lot of applications get rejected because, talking to the Secretariat, because they don't have the required information in the required format up to a certain standard, and that's, you know, it's a threshold that needs to be met before they even assess whether the site's eligible. But we expect state endorsement of sites before we put them up, and there is generally a pretty rigorous process of going backwards and forwards with the site, assessing all the scientific references, assessing that all the numbers add up, assessing that all the species do exist and that they exist in the way that they're said to. That process can take some time. You know, we take it quite seriously. And there's things around boundary descriptions that need to be pretty solidly laid out. I'll just run through the criteria because it's interesting. So I won't read them all out, but if you can take a look here, there's some which say, you know, if this is a unique kind of wetland. So Australia has some artesian springs. There's certain kinds of things that don't exist much. Then there's a series on ecological communities. So, you know, if it provides refuge at a critical stage, or if it supports populations that are important for maintaining biological diversity. Then there's a series on water birds and fish. There's specific information on water bird populations. Oh, that's gone off. Hello? Anyway, so the waterbird information, and sorry, this is a bit long, the waterbird information is stored by an NGO, Wetlands International, and you can only use those population estimates. We're trying to make that more flexible and use bird life estimates, but at this point you have to use that one sort of source of data, or things that have been published in the peer-reviewed literature and are commonly accepted. And so there needs to be a pretty solid basis for any of these population criteria. So once it's listed, there's a requirement to maintain the ecological character at the time of listing. It's quite static, and there's a need to ensure that that doesn't change too much. There are some issues. It takes a snapshot at the time of listing, and you want to keep it there, but with climate change, rising sea levels, that might cause an issue for some sites. So there's some discussions around flexibility, but the idea is that you work out what a healthy version of it looks like and make sure it doesn't stray from that too far. And then you need to update management plans and information sheets every 6 years or so to ensure that that information is up to date. It gets protected under the EPBC Act as a matter of national environmental significance. So, for instance, I'm sure many of you understand this, but you know, if you want to do a development at a site like that, it will get referred to our team, and we will, which will potentially have a significant impact. It will get referred to our team, and we can assess the potential impacts on the Ramsar site and provide evidence. Usually, what ends up happening is there are conditions put on it, or the area of impact gets redrawn a little. It's rare that things go ahead which will have an impact on sites. There are some cases where things get contested, and there are a couple of sites that are in that process of contestation, but by and large we've managed to avoid having any serious developments on Ramsar sites, and that's, I guess one way that that's playing out right now is that the Commonwealth is very committed under this government to ramping up our renewable energy capacity. One of the things that involves is setting up sites for wind farms. That team, very productive, but have set up a number of areas where wind farms should go, which are right next to Ramsar sites. So there's a bit of back and forwards internally, as well as with the threatened species and migratory species teams. That's being taken seriously, though. The kind of teams that coordinate throughout the department have kind of flagged this as an issue, so there's a bit of back and forth to try and, put those declarations in areas that won't impact the sites, but there's lively debate internally. What do we actually do? So we manage, under the EPBC Act, the legislative provisions, as well as the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. We have a regional land care program under the National Heritage Trust. There's about $50 million about to go out to a number of Ramsar sites across the country through the CMAs or NRM bodies. We've tried to get pretty decent spread across all the states and all the different areas. Those come through the National Resource Management bodies. They'll last for a few years, and then we'll do another round of these programs. It's a bit more of a focus on ecosystems rather than threatened species this time around. So that should get approved soon. They're just kind of doing a bit of horse trading, the final approval stage right now. We've got a couple of NESP research hubs, as well as I mentioned, international meetings. We coordinate a lot with the states and the NGOs. We have a pretty decent, track record of doing communication, education, participation and awareness. So we run a number of webinar series. We have relationships with a number of the wetland education centres like this. It's probably important here to say at the last Ramsar COP there was a resolution on wetland education. We've pulled together a network of environmental education centres across Australia. It's being led by the Hunter Wetlands Centre, by Christine Brietta there, who's amazing. But the idea is to create materials for the school curriculum based on wetland education. We've spoken to ACARA, the curriculum people. That's coming together, but it's a volunteer effort, so it's happening a bit slowly. If anyone wanted to be a part of that, we'd welcome it, but there's material there, so we can get some kind of module for the curriculum together, potentially some on coastal systems, some on inland systems. We hold workshops, pull people together. We've got conferences happening. There's a coast-to-coast conference later in the year that we'll have a stall at and announce some things at. Current projects, we're reviewing we're trying to create an Australian wetlands inventory, and we're going to review the Australian National Aquatic Ecosystems Toolkit as part of that. We'll work with the states to formalise how we can all classify wetlands and pull that information together. We've got those regional land care projects. We've got a climate vulnerability of sites thing that's about to start up, where we'll get 3 to 5 sites across the Murray-Darling Basin and fund research into the climate vulnerability of those sites. Please keep an eye out for that. We're also developing materials to help people list sites. There's a bit of work that Richard Kingsford's doing in the same space, so we're trying to get that to line up. And as mentioned, engagement with those NESP hubs. I'll give a bit of an update on what's happening in the international world. So Ramsar COP14, Max was there, was last November. It was supposed to be in China. It was supposed to be in Wuhan. That didn't happen for some reason. But China still hosted it. China were actually really good hosts. Xi Jinping himself announced that they're creating an international mangrove centre, which I thought was really cool. That's going to go ahead. There are some other international mangrove centres though, so we'll see how that all plays out. We put 3 resolutions through. One on waterbirds, meaning that populations don't have to be just using that one population estimate. You can use other peer-reviewed literature. We put one on youth engagement. We've set up a youth working group. We've got youth focal points getting appointed in countries, and we're trying to incorporate young people in Australia into the work of wetlands, and that's ticking away. If you want to be a part of that as well, that's something we'd welcome. And they're reviewing the strategic plan for the whole convention, and so we had chaired the group setting up the review process. And we got some friends appointed to some of the key working groups, and I got appointed chair of the youth working group, so that work's ongoing. We've got COP15 coming up in 2025 in Zimbabwe, so we've, at the Commonwealth level, got a program of work heading there. I guess the important part is that 5th strategic plan for the convention goes from 24 to 2030. It frames wetland conservation globally. there's a consultation process happening at the second half of this year, and where it's being run by Christine Prieto from Hunter, along with a set of global consultants, including Rob McInnes, if anyone knows of him. We'd be very keen to actually engage with Australian organisations, researchers, state government, wetland centres, to get what they think are key priorities, what they can see as lessons to be learned or knowledge to be shared. So yeah, please engage with that consultation process when it happens, because it'll allow us to set the agenda globally. And if there is anything you think needs to be included in that, we're listening now. So yeah, I'll try and loop everyone in. I'll loop Lance in as that happens. We've also, we're setting up this youth working group, trying to get youth engaged in every level in Ramsar work. So we want to get young people on all the different bodies of the convention, include young people in different national committees or policy processes, create opportunities, potentially create a pipeline of university students with relevant scientific expertise to find work in the wetland space. If you have any ideas there or want to help out, we've got a mandate and really strong support from our minister, from the Prime Minister. So that youth engagement is something Labor's really keen to get happening. Got an office for youth as well, setting up a number of programs. And then we're concerned about climate change impacts on sites, especially on shifting site boundaries. If you've got a site that moves because rainfall or sea levels change, what do you do about that if it's trapped at one point in time? So we're starting a conversation about how to manage those kinds of things and manage site boundary changes, character changes that management won't fix. So open to thoughts about that. I'm aware a lot of researchers are talking about this too, so we're looking to be productive and work with people. And finally, we want to share Australian stories globally in a more positive way, because while in Australia it seems like things are constantly in political turmoil and there's a lot of difficulties, I guess, in getting conservation projects off the ground, we're actually doing a lot better than most places, and we've achieved a lot more than most parts of the world. So you just kind of lose that, I guess, in some of the negative conversations. So we'd be keen to talk up some of the good things that we're doing. And as mentioned, we want everyone here to be involved in the consultation. Finally, there's ongoing work in the department. We've got this 30 by 30 thing. We want to look at conservation that happens outside of protected areas, so places like this, but also wineries where you can do sightseeing but they're protecting the nature, or defence sites or things like that. So they're setting up this thing called OECMs. That's something we're quite interested in, so get in touch if you have any thoughts or are doing that kind of work. We've got a bit of a refresh both of the team and of the government, so we're open to building new partnerships, new relationships. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. We've got room, time for just a question or two before you leave.
Any questions?
Any questions for Dylan? Sorry, Anne?
Yeah.
Anne?
I would like to ask Dylan, there's a Ramsar listed area on Western Port Bay.
Yes.
Why do you laugh?
Oh, no, just continue, please. Yeah.
Why is the government and the Shire
Yeah.
continually trying to put heavy industry in that area? Hastings,
I would traditionally pass to the Victorian government to answer this question. Yeah. But I'm aware it's a contentious site, and I think part of the issue is that we put a site somewhere right near where there's a lot of industrial activity happening, and so we kind of created a site where there will be constantly this tension. It's a bit tricky because the way the Environmental Protection Biodiversity Conservation Act was initially set up was we want development to happen, but we don't want it to we want to avoid some of the really negative impacts on nature. And what it means is that if you have sites that are really close to some of those areas that are important economically, this issue will emerge again and again and again. So it's something we're aware of, but resolving it is,
The other problem with that site is that Hastings is zoned as being industrial, but we did have, so there was AGL tried to put a gas import facility at Crib Point. We were heavily involved in that and assessing the, all of the documents that were produced as part of the environmental assessment, and that our Victorian Minister for Planning didn't allow that to go forward. So that was, I think, a good outcome from the Ramsar perspective. But yeah, it's absolutely on our radar to make sure. Well, the Crib Point facility didn't go ahead. So yeah, I think the environmental protection legislation we had in place worked. It stopped that from actually happening. But yeah, it's particularly along our coast. There's a lot of development pressure. Yeah.
It's a sad and cynical laugh. Anyway.
Question over here somewhere.
In the back? Yeah.
Just that last acronym you mentioned, starting with O, I didn't quite get what it was.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Sorry, I'm going back to government mode. So, backdrop, we signed up for this global biodiversity framework. There's 2 targets in there. One of them that relate to this. One of them is protecting 30% of our lands, inland waters, and 30% of our oceans and coastal areas by 2030. And that needs to be representative, so we can't just protect a huge area of desert and then say we've done 30%. It needs to cover different ecosystems. We don't have money to create a national park estate that big, so we're looking at trying to find areas where there is actual conservation happening. And so the technical definition that was developed by the IUCN about a decade and a half ago, I think, it's been steadily evolving since then, is other area-based effective conservation measures. So other area-based effective conservation measures. But yeah, if you Google OECM, that's obviously easier to remember, so it comes up. So there's a program of work. Australia released draft principles on that, which include things like long-term protection, informed consent. That there's a lot of thought going into it. And so later, I think early next year, they'll start opening it up for people who've got sites they think that can fit that criteria to apply to have them recognised.
Thank you. Just
Yep.
one
Last
other
one.
question,
Yep.
Kevin. Oh, sorry, Kevin in the
Oh, sorry, Kevin. Yeah, he was first.
Yeah,
Yep.
thanks, Dylan. You put up in the slide before about a trigger for generating a permit under the EPBC Act in a Ramsar site
Yeah.
as a change, a significant impact on the ecological character of the Ramsar site.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to be presenting on a Ramsar site, which is a very heavily modified site.
Yeah.
But it has significant Ramsar values. I can see a situation where I actually would want to change the ecological character of parts of that Ramsar site to improve its suitability for protecting the main Ramsar values that it's actually been recognised for, supporting bird populations. Do you slavishly apply that criteria? Or,
So there's a few things here. One is, I was previously working on the Coorong where similar things happened. They took a snapshot in the 70s, 80s when it got listed, and it had already been significantly modified by that point, so potentially a healthier ecosystem is different to the snapshot they've got. We are legally bound currently, if there's going to be a significant impact on the ecological character, we are bound to talk about that. We're not in a position where we can see something that's going to have some positive effects, potentially expanding habitat or changing the hydrological nature of the site so that it'd be a little bit better for nature. People in the team understand science to a certain degree and appreciate and recognise those things, so we wouldn't push very hard against something like that happening. There's a lot of sustainable development limit adjustment mechanism projects in Victoria which will have an impact on the site but will be more positive than they are negative, and we'd want those to go ahead. But the broader point is a conversation we're trying to start now, both in Australia and internationally, and it's going to be tricky because it gets so political and people can use it for making things happen that probably shouldn't have happened, but we recognise under climate change especially, the natural or healthy baseline will shift, and so we need to try and find a more flexible approach, but we need to do that carefully.
We do talk
Yeah.
in terms of maintain or improve in Victoria. So yeah, understanding that that they could change and it would be an improvement, and that's fine.
Can I just add to that one? Under the convention processes, you can change the ecological character of the site if you have reason to do it.
Do you want me to do that?
And there's a series of why you say maintain ecological character. You don't have to maintain it under the convention processes. That's the condition it was when it was listed. Australia, I believe, has on the whole chosen that option, which is a valid option, but there are other options in the market. So you can change it. Countries don't tend to do it.
All right,
Sorry, I think we had just one question.
and then I'll pass over to Andrea. Yep.
Just a quick one, Dylan. So wastewater, reclaimed water treatment plants filling wetlands, does that sort of come under this as natural, even though it's brought back
So probably one of our, probably the most important site in Victoria is the Werribee treatment plant. Yeah, it supports an enormous number of birds, particularly when the rest of the landscape's dry. So yeah, most of our sites were listed in 82, and all of them had undergone significant change. But also we had this, system that we'd changed so that it was very, very productive. And we are, and that will be maintained into the future. So yeah, it's nothing to stop something from getting listed. Yeah.
We'd support that. It's played out well in Werribee, right?
Oh yeah.
Before you go, Dylan, and before I introduce Andrea, I must also thank you with a little Task Force Growler bag. Great information about Task Force Growler. And I was very remiss not to thank Anne also.